Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of Light Up. Today I'd like to talk to you about God is what we are not. Yes, God is what we are not. And just thinking about the society we live in, we're taught to be independent and self-reliant. And a lot of times in that, we put God last, if at all. We're so used to depending on ourselves and just digging down when times get tough and just finding that girt down on the inside. And we put God last. So I'm looking at the children of Israel in the book of Exodus, the 16th chapter. They were in the wilderness for 40 years wandering. The scripture said they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Now, we know wilderness, there's nothing good in the wilderness. It can't be anything good. It's a desolate place. And if they were wandering, they don't know where food's coming from. They don't know where water's coming from. They don't know where their shelter is. There's just no hope. And they're living like this for 40 years. God sends them a man by the name of Moses. And Moses is a man who consults God. God gives him direction and instruction to lead the children of Israel out of the wilderness after they've been there 40 years. So Moses leads the children out of the wilderness after 40 years, and the first thing they do is complain. God is what we are not. God is a blessor when we are not deserving. Moses consults God on behalf of the people. They're complaining. They're in a better place. However, they're not even consulting God for themselves. They're not hunting. They're not fishing. They're not planting. But they're telling Moses, we're hungry, and you brought us over here to die. Now, you may say, well, maybe they weren't taught those things. Survival mode. They survived the wilderness. They can survive in a better place. So Moses seeks God on behalf of the children of Israel. God sends quail and manna from heaven. God is what we are not. God is a blessor where they weren't even deserving. And so he feeds them. I think about another story. I think about Samson. Samson was gifted with strength. And yes, he was gifted. It came from God. He had haters. He had people that wanted to see him die. They wanted to take his strength. They wanted to take Samson's glory. And instead of Samson being grateful to God for the gift he had, he began to play with the enemy. God is, and God was Samson's strength when he wasn't. So he plays with the enemy. They want to know the source of his strength. There is a woman named Delilah who comes along, and she can get his strength. She thinks she can get the answer to where his strength lies. So he begins to play with her and give her riddles. And this does nothing but make his enemies that much more angrier, because every time he gave them a riddle, that was not the key to his strength. However, Delilah finally gets him to give her the answer. Samson wakes up and his strength is gone. His eyesight is gone. I'm fast forwarding. This is in Judges, the 16th chapter. But his strength is gone. His sight is gone. So he begins to shake. The scripture said he begins to shake. He can't see, and he shakes, and there's no strength. Instead of God being his first resort, he was relying on himself. He knew that if he shook, that he would feel his strength. There was no strength. They cut his hair. So the scripture, fast forward, goes on to say Samson begins to cry out to the Lord, and he says, God, if you just give me my strength back one more time so I can destroy my enemies. The scripture said he destroyed his enemies, more enemies in his death than he did while he was living. What am I saying? God is what? Strength when we aren't strong. Instead of Samson relying on God for the first result, he waited until he lost everything, and then he cried out to the Lord. I'm thinking about the disciples in the midst of the storm. They're in the boat. They're in the midst of the waves tossing the ship. The scripture said the ship. The waves are tossing the ship. The winds are strong. They're out here in the middle. And we're in Matthew, the 8th chapter. And there is no peace. They are afraid. And instead of them talking to God for themselves, what do? They go down in the ship and they wake up Jesus and they say, Master, Master, all of this is going on and you're asleep. And the scriptures say he stands up, Jesus stands up in the middle of the ship, and he speaks peace to the winds and to the storms. He speaks peace. But the disciples didn't rely on God first. They went to the man. They went to Jesus first. God is our strength in the time that we are weak. God is peace when there is no peace. He's peace when we aren't peaceful. We're in the middle of, our pastor says, 2 collisions. We're in a worldwide pandemic right now. We are also in an uprising in our nation, in our country, in America. The government's turned upside down, the national government, the state governments, our local governments, they're upside down. There's no answer, there's no cure to this pandemic. We are in social injustices, we're in rioting, we're in so many things at this point. And now, who's consulting the first resort, which is Jesus? We're taking down statues. The people are taking down statues. They're setting up camps. They're looking for an answer. But God is what we are not. God is peace in the midst of the storm. God is strength in our time of weakness. God is the blessor when we don't even deserve it. I'm just here to encourage you today. God is what we are not. Be blessed.